call floating the cider. The cider, as you know, is this highly visible piece of monofilament, usually, that's built into the middle part of your contact or European style nymphing leader to act as a strike aid. With contact nymphing, short range nymphing, if you will, often we're getting close to the fish, holding the rod tip at an angle. We're trying to keep as much line leader off the water, including the cider, off the water, and we're just looking for any hesitation to set the hook. But there are times where distance is needed. We're in central Pennsylvania now. Low water, typical late summer conditions. Fish are spooky, on high alert. We need a little bit more distance. And also, we don't need a lot of depth. We don't need to go super deep because the water is fairly shallow. We don't need a really deep riding presentation. And this is where we're going to switch from basically short range nymphing, fishing directly underneath the rod tip, to actually casting longer distances and actually laying this cider on the water. And instead of using this as a visual tool off the water, we're actually going to float. We're going to put some paste or some gel on this to keep this cider riding higher and treat this like an indicator, or what many refer to as a suspension device. The leaders that I use, I don't switch up when I go from contact nymphing or Euro nymphing to floating the cider. Basically, I'm using the same leader formula. The only thing that's going to be different is instead of short casting, rod tip higher, we're going to be making longer casts, keeping a lot of the leader on the water and floating the cider. So the formula that I'm using, and I'm always experimenting, playing around with different formulas. I'm never content with one. This is just about 30 to 35 feet of just level 12-pound test maxima. So there's really no fly line whatsoever. This is just a really long leader, about 30, 35 feet. And then I have about a 2.5 to 3 foot section of cider material. And it can be shorter, it can be longer. It's all personal preference. But about 30 to 35 feet of 12-pound test maxima. And then my cider is going to be anywhere from like 8 to 10-pound test material. And I'm going to have a couple different colors. You know, it can be a similar color, same color, or you can do multiple colors. But again, when I'm contact nymphing, I do like multiple colors for just contrasting different backgrounds and so forth. But one of the things I'm going to do is every 12 inches, I'm going to put a tag in here using a blood knot. And the reason why we use a blood knot is often the tags come off perpendicular rather than kind of horizontal or parallel with the leader. So I want these tags sticking up, almost like a set of bunny ears, or what some people call turkey tracks. Call it whatever you want. But we're going to do maybe a knot in our cider every 12 inches. In this case, this is every 12 inches, and I have about 3 feet of yellow, and then I have white, and then I have some kind of like orange colors. But the advantage with these tags is twofold. One is because we are going to actually put some paste, and you could put gel, but I recommend a paste. And I'm using a Loon Payout paste here, but you can use the old school Mucilin. There's other companies that make very similar products, but I use a paste because it's going to stick and it's going to stay on your leader a lot longer than, say, a gel. And I'm going to take this paste, take a liberal amount, and we're going to pack it in these knots. And one of the things I like about the knots, it really allows me to kind of pack in that paste in those knots. And then also, not only on my cider, but any area of that leader where I'm anticipating laying on the water, I'm also going to grease. So I have a high floating leader and a high floating cider material. One of the advantages of having a leader that floats high, or even in many cases a fly line, is the way you pick line leader off the water. Anytime you have a leader or a fly line that's sunk or partially sunk below the surface, when you go to pick up your cast, that line has got to break the surface tension, making a noise and often a big disturbance before you break the surface tension, before you go to pick up your back cast. And in low water like this that we're going to be showing you here shortly, that type of disturbance is often going to spook any fish in the realm or area that you're fishing. So by having a high floating leader and cider, when you pick up the cast, you're going to peel the line rather than rip the line off the water, just giving you a cleaner pickoff and giving you just a little better presentation. And then the other advantage with these ears is, even though this is a visible material that's going to be floating because we're putting paste on there, it's going to be laying flush in the water column. And no matter how visible it is, sometimes when you're fishing further away, it's going to be difficult to see. So when you make this cast, we're going to talk about almost like a check cast, like a check dry fly leader cast, where you're going to stop it, check it high, and drop. It's going to drop nice and soft, and when you drop this leader nice and soft in the water, most of the time, maybe 8 or 9 out of every 10 times, the ears are going to stand straight up. And when you're fishing from a distance, those ears that are sticking up off the water surface is going to give you a slightly better visual from a distance. So that is why I grease my leader, I'll grease the cider, and I do leave the tags. Help packs the paste in, floats the cider higher, but also allows you to see the cider better on the water from a distance. And then off of that, we're gonna run a shallow tippet. This is a shallow presentation. We are not going deep. This cider doesn't have much buoyancy. You cannot suspend heavy nymphs. So the nymphs that I'm often fishing are going to be like a 2.5, usually at the heaviest, to almost like a 2.0 millimeter tungsten bead, or in many cases, just using a single brass bead. But we can't use a lot of weight. This is just designed to fish our flies a couple inches to maybe a foot below the surface. Not deep, just shallow. So it doesn't matter if you're fishing a shallow flat or deep water. Anytime that you need to cast distance and fish your flies just a few inches till maybe a foot below the surface, this is a good technique. Think about summertime right now. We have some wind, we have a storm coming in. We still have inchworms, we have ants, we have terrestrials. A lot of those insects, especially with wind, are going to get kicked off into the water. They're going to float a little bit, but eventually these land-dwelling terrestrial insects get stuck in the water and maybe submerge, get stuck in the water just a little below the surface. This is where using a sunken terrestrial, like a sunken ant, or what we're going to be doing here to imitate a sunken inchworm, is just a little green mop version of the green weenie. But we're just going to fish this fly just a few inches below the surface and right off the bank. So this is why my tippet is going to be very short, usually anywhere from 20 to 24 inches. Usually no more than 24 inches is the length of my tippet. And I'm going to add that tippet straight to my cider material. And so I have 5X material going to my 2X cider. And anytime you're adding 2 large differences in diameters, often a triple, or in this case, a quadruple surgeon's knot is all you need. You can use a tippet ring if you want, but I don't have a tippet ring today, so I'm just going to connect 2 large differences in diameters. And when you do that, when you're adding 2 differences in diameters, large differences in diameters together, usually a triple or a quadruple surgeons is all you need to make that bond secure and last well. So this is the leader formula that we're going to use today. Same as my contact nymphing formula. We're going to use a soft action fly rod, a nymphing rod. There's no line, there's very little mass, so we need a rod that can flex, so to speak, with very little mass. So we're going to use a European style nymphing rod in combination with this long leader, floating the cider from a distance, and let's see if we can catch a fish or two. So we have our tippet. And what we're going to do here is just grease up the cider. Pack that paste in. This is going to be some water here that we're fishing is more broken. Really don't need to make a long cast. So we're going to just kind of high stick this cider. So I've been making a couple lousy casts, starting high and then pushing downward in my presentation. With this, just we're using some distance. We need to hand a little bit lower. It allows us to go level outward or slightly upward. So hand a little bit lower and then aim out, allowing us to drop that fly in there with a little more delicacy. Drop it in there. Kind of just a flat water presentation. So some tricos are on the water here. Been seeing a few fish rise. I'm still hoping they're gonna take the weenie. Work off the bank here. Short little strokes. Pop it in there. Those tags really stand higher off the water. It's giving me a nice visual from a distance. And this is just kind of a technique in a situation where you're not going to often be banging fish out left and right. This water type, this time of the year, sometimes is just downright challenging. So this is more of a stealth and a patience game. We have a fish that's rising right up there. See if we can force feed a green weenie. Pop it right there. It flashed on my fly several times. So here's what we're gonna do. Can't force feed these fish. We're gonna switch up. Taking off the green weenie. Even though it's not sized correctly, we're gonna use just a basic little pheasant tail right here. Something a little more natural. And see if maybe, just maybe, this will work. Take our nippers. Tippet is a little rough at the tip. Kind of cut that at like an angle. Allows us to kind of push that right through the kind of that cloggy eye. Little 5-turn clinch. I use a lot of my 5-turn clinches for flies like 16 and larger, but for smaller flies I do like a Davy's knot. Okay, fish is still rising. Okay, let's see what we can do here. A little flip. Lay that right on in there. Just lay that. There we go. So right there was just kind of a little adjustment we needed to make. Had a fish that was rising. Luckily on Tricos, was not taking the green weenie. Just switched to a little PT, a little micro PT. I saw the fish come up, eat the fly. I wasn't sure if it was my fly. And then eventually I saw the cider twitch, set the hook, and we're into a little rainbow. So there we are. Require some consistent maintenance. So we just gotta keep that cider floating high. It's like with any indicator that's partially submerged or sunk, it just loses its strike detection capabilities, or lessens them, if you will. So keep this floating nice and high. And the other thing too is when you use paste, just make sure you really wipe this stuff off, because when you're casting, if you don't, you'll find that your hands are going to be slipping on the cork and the grip, and you're going to have a far less productive cast. Going right back to work, a little flip. We're going to stick with that pheasant tail. Kind of just making a longer cast. And you can even incorporate a little bit of a haul into the presentation as well. And because this leader is floating high, we can actually mend this just like you would a fly line. If you make a cast and it's kind of curved out like this, you can just simply pick up, lift, and reposition the cider in line with the current, or in any position you want. So it's just like mending a fly line. Just lift, reset, and your drift is continued. So that's another advantage of having a leader and cider that's floating high. It's just the capabilities of actually repositioning the line and leader after the cast is made. Another thing worth mentioning here is just kind of the stealth qualities of this rod. When you're getting in low clear water and you're up on close and top of fish, you don't want to be making excessive hand movements. The one nice thing about these style of rods So that all you need to really make the cast work is just a simple flick of the wrist. And one of the great things that Gary LaFontaine said is that movement is one of the biggest killers of spooking fish. So if you're here making lots of excessive movements, body movements, you're going to spook fish. But if you can just get in position, just kind of keep most of your movements to a minimal and make a very short casting stroke, you're going to be far more successful just by reducing your movements and alerting far fewer fish. Rip, hopefully find a few players. Short little strokes. We're just working each little seam. So we're not trying to cast across multiple speed currents, just like you're trying to fish an indicator or a dry fly, you kind of go with the current. So I'm just going to hold the rod tip out and then just flick up, trying to lay the tip of that cider kind of parallel to the flow of the water I want to fish. I'll move over, lay it on the water and slide. Just look for any hesitation. Have a really nice seam on the far side here, holding the rod tip over the current. This is why we use longer rods. Cocking the wrist back, a little flip, lay the tip on the water, just float it. There we go. Missed that one. I lost it. Lay that on there again. Hand in front, short little flip. There we go. Nice recovery. Strong fish. All right. Nice wild brown. Healthy fish. Nippers here. Yeah, beautiful. See, this can be done in a variety of water types. You can do this in flat water. You can also do this in kind of choppy, broken pocket water. We can also go to a tight line system where we're keeping the cider off the water. But just short little flips. That's what makes casting these leaders so easy with these soft action fly rods. Again, the casting stroke is very similar to that of a tenkara cast. The hand just stays out, fixated, and just a flip of the wrist. We can work a little tighter into that log, lay it right off the bank. Line control, line control. Kind of get up in this log right here. Flip. Just remember when you're casting this, try not to aim down. So often you find yourself looking down, pushing down, and just getting a lousy cast. One of the best tips I can give you for kind of like trying to create distance and laying that cider out is looking out and aiming out. So usually the rod tip goes where your eyes are looking. So when you're looking outward, the rod tip goes out. When you look down, you're gonna end up pushing down and collapsing the cast. So just kind of orient your head and your shoulders, body posture that your mom would be proud of, and then just flip out. Lay it in there, float it, and drift. and miss a fish. See if we can get this one back here. Missed another fish. Hook point looks good. It's just a dummy on the other end of the line. Float it, reach. Kind of keep that tip floating, 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 floating. So, missed two fish, definitely two fish. Little PT, not sure what happened. Obviously something on my end. So we're gonna go back, and we're just gonna go back to the green little weenie. A little mop version. And again, if you have a tag end or your tippet is kind of rough, or kind of flat, so to speak, it's not going to go through the hook eye, so you should just kind of cut that at a slight angle, trim it, and especially if you have an eye that's partially clogged, it's just going to allow you to kind of push that through that hook eye. And do this. A little 5-turn clinch. Pinch. Keep the tag end short. In many cases, I don't even trim it, especially in broken water like this. I don't think it really matters a whole heck of a lot. Short little stroke, lay that tip of that cider on the water, float it, see if we can get this one back. Okay, just a few more casts. Stick it, slide it, just kind of reach, do whatever you can to give that a nice float, and there's the fish of the day right there. There we go, back in action again. So who knows, switching patterns, maybe the pattern was just riding a little deeper, whatever it is. Now heavy turbulent water or more turbulent water, just keep the rod tip down. We don't want to lift the rod tip straight up. Fish freaks out. Just keep that rod tip down low. We can often just kind of slide these fish under these faster currents, and then when we're ready, lift up. Nice brown. Rod tip down low. We're gonna skate and then flip. Just shoot that right up in there. So one of the things we can do here, we have this obstacle overhanging limb. We're gonna use a tension cast. Water tension, keep the rod tip down low, almost kissing the water. And we're going to keep the rod tip down low, and we're going to just kind of pull, almost dragging the fly on the surface. And as we're pulling, the tension is going to help build and increase the energy building that rod. And so we're going to pull. The further we pull, the more bend, the more energy, and then what we're going to do is just flick it out. So it's more of a stiff arm drift and a little flip of the wrist at the very end. So let's do this here. Rod tip down low, forearm nice and tight, drift, tap, and it shoots it right up in there. It's almost like a slingshot sort of cast. So when you're trying to go under an obstacle like this with a weighted object or a weighted rig, that's one avenue to go about. End of the drift, just place the flies down, reposition, cock the wrist back, slide, flip, and it shoots it up there nice and tight. There's your drift. All right, onward.